I looked at her standing there in the square, all those eyes on her, and the only thing I could think to ask was, "Can you cook?" The morning Meera arrived in Asheford Village, not a single person came to welcome her. She stood at the edge of the cobblestone market square with a single leather bag at her feet and the weight of 100 silent stares pressing down on her shoulders. The village elder had arranged this as a peace offering. He had called it a diplomatic marriage between the orc clans of the Greywood and the farming settlements of the Asheford Basin. Someone had to cross the line first. That someone was Meera. She held her chin level. She had promised herself she would not look down. The man she was to marry stepped forward from the small crowd. His name was Doran, and everything about him said he hadn't been warned. His eyes went wide for just a second, long enough for her to see it before he arranged his face into something careful and polite. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of hands that knew real work. He turned the rim of his hat in slow circles between his fingers, searching for words. He found exactly the wrong ones. "Can you cook?" The square went quiet in a different way. A woman near the bread cart covered her mouth. An old man on a bench looked away. Even the wind seemed to pause, embarrassed on his behalf. Meera felt the question land somewhere deep in the place where pride lives. She had led harvest festivals for 300 families. She had fed entire battalions of orc soldiers during the border disputes of the long winter. She had trained under Elder Silva herself, the most celebrated cook in all of the Greywood clans, learning recipes that had been passed down for 6 generations in clay pots sealed with beeswax and trust. But standing in the square in this village in front of these people, she was simply an orc, a foreign bride, a question mark in green skin. "Can you cook?" As though that were all she might be worth. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then she said quietly, "Give me your kitchen." Doran's home was a baker's cottage at the edge of the market lane. The kitchen was large by village standards. A wide stone hearth, iron pots in 3 sizes, dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, sacks of flour, and grains stacked along the wall. He watched from the doorway as Meera set her bag down and began moving through the space with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never doubted herself in a kitchen in her life. She didn't ask where anything was. She found it. She pulled dried iron moss from her bag, a deep green herb the village had never seen, and rubbed it between her palms until the scent filled the room like pine and warm rain. She rendered fat in the largest iron pot with the quiet patience of someone who understood that great food could not be rushed. She layered wild roots she'd gathered at dawn from the tree line outside the village, added cracked pepper and a fistful of coarse salt, and began to work the dough for a flatbread that used no yeast, only the moisture from grated root vegetables and the heat of her hands. Doran watched. He told himself he was only making sure she knew where things were. He stayed for an hour. The smell reached the market square before the bread was done. By the time Meera carried the first pot to the cottage window, there were people in the lane. Not staring this time, but leaning, tilting their heads toward the scent like flowers toward the sun. The woman from the bread cart had walked over without meaning to. The old man from the bench was standing now, hands clasped behind his back. Doran tasted the stew first. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked down at the bowl with an expression Meera couldn't quite read. Then he looked up at her. "What is this called in your language?" She considered. "There is no word for it. In ours, it means something like the meal you make when you want someone to know you came in peace." He looked at the bowl again, then at her. The village ate together that evening in the square, something Meera was told hadn't happened in over 2 years. There was no formal declaration, no elder's ceremony. People simply brought their own bowls and asked if there was more. There was always more. Meera had made sure of it. She fed 43 people that night. She remembered every face. Later, when the square had emptied and the fire had settled to low coals, Doran sat across from her at the cottage table. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that comes before something honest. "I asked you the wrong question," he said finally. "This morning in the square." Meera wrapped both hands around her cup. "Yes," she said simply. "You did. I'm sorry." She looked at him. His eyes didn't flinch. She had learned over years of diplomacy across the Greywood borders that most apologies came wrapped in excuses. His didn't. It was just the two words, plain and standing on their own. An apology that trusted her to decide what to do with it. She nodded once. Then we start there. Outside, the village of Asheford was quiet under a salted sky. Inside the baker's cottage, the iron pot still sat warm on the hearth. The smell of iron moss and wild roots clung to the walls, to the curtains, to the wood of the ceiling beams. The kind of smell that stays in a house for days and makes the people inside it feel, without knowing why, that they are somewhere safe. Meera had not come to Asheford to be welcomed. She had come to give them a reason to want her there. She had done it the only way she knew how. Not with words. Not with ceremony. Not with the quiet performance of someone trying to be liked. She had fed them, and in doing so, she had shown them exactly who she was. Not a question. Not a peace offering. Not an arrangement. A woman who knew her worth and had the patience to let the world catch up. Meera did not need Asheford to love her. She had not crossed the Greywood border searching for warmth she hadn't earned. But as she sat in that quiet cottage, fire breathing low in the hearth, the iron pot still holding the last of the stew like a secret kept warm, she felt something unexpected settle into her chest. Not belonging. Not yet. Something smaller and more honest than that. A beginning. Doran refilled her cup without asking. She let him. Outside, the village was still. The stars above Asheford burned cold and indifferent, the way stars always do. But the lane below them smelled of iron moss and wild roots, and that smell was hers. She had put it there. Nobody could take that back.